The sky above the sprawling plains buckled, pregnant with a coming tempest. Rain, cold and relentless, lashed down, plastering a woman's tattered dress to her frantic form. A massive oak, struck by lightning, lay across her path, its heavy branches pinning her to the unforgiving mud. Her breath hitched, ragged and desperate, as the distant thud of hooves grew closer, a slow, inevitable drumbeat in the mounting storm. Then, a figure emerged from the deluge, a silent sentinel atop a dark horse, his silhouette stark against the bruised horizon. Her gaze, wild with a terror that clawed at her throat, met his. The words, torn from her, were a plea against oblivion. "Please, I am begging you, rip this off. If you don't, they'll find me." In the unforgiving expanse of the 1893 West, a single choice can shatter a lifetime of solitude, igniting a powder keg of buried secrets and dangerous desires. When an innocent plea pulls a hardened rancher into a web of corruption and a powerful man's wrath, will justice prevail, or will the whispers of the West claim another victim? Before we delve into this gripping tale, let us know in the comments. Where are you watching Whispers of the West from today? Now, prepare yourself, for the storm is just beginning. Archie Montgomery, a man whose principles were as unyielding as the parched ground he cultivated, rode homeward, his horse a dark silhouette against the tumultuous sky. His life, forged in silence and isolation, was a bastion of neutrality, a careful avoidance of the conflicts that plagued the scattered communities of the West. He sought only peace, hard-earned and fiercely guarded. Meanwhile, Janie Blunt's world had shattered. Trapped in a gilded cage with Thomas Blunt, one of the region's wealthiest and most ruthless men, she had stumbled upon his deepest secrets. Hidden documents, falsified contracts, forged receipts, and incriminating letters to local officials exposed a vast network of arms smuggling, public land manipulation, and tax fraud. Thomas was not just cruel. He was the corrupt heart of the county. When Janie threatened to expose his crimes, her marriage became a death sentence. In Thomas's ruthless calculus, problems were not divorced. They were eliminated. Now, she ran, drenched and desperate, pursued by her husband's ruthless enforcers through the torrential rain. Her breath hitched, ragged and raw, her waterlogged dress a heavy anchor. A deafening crack of thunder, a blinding flash of lightning, and a massive oak crashed down, splintered and smoking. The trunk didn't crush her, but it pinned her sodden skirt, binding her to the mud. Frantically, she tore at the heavy fabric, but it held fast. The chilling certainty struck her. They would find her in moments. The thud of hooves grew louder, closer. Archie Montgomery reined in his horse, his gaze piercing the rain. He saw her, sprawled in the mud, eyes wide with a terror that clawed at her throat. Her face, streaked with dirt and rain, was a mask of raw desperation. "Please, I am begging you, rip this off. If you don't, they'll find me," she pleaded, her voice a ragged whisper against the storm's roar. For an instant, Archie froze. His entire life had been defined by non-interference. But her gaze, the desperate urgency of a soul on the brink, tore through his carefully constructed defenses. He dismounted, knelt swiftly, and with a brutal pull of his Bowie knife, tore through the thick, wet fabric, freeing her. Janie, bruised and utterly exhausted, barely stood. He lifted her onto his horse, then climbed on behind, his jaw tight with reluctance. Despite every instinct, he carried her away from the storm and towards the stark sanctuary of his ranch. The Montgomery Ranch offered little solace from the internal storm brewing within Archie. He treated Janie's raw scrapes and bruises with a clinical detachment, his hands gentle yet his eyes distant, as if to acknowledge her presence too deeply would solidify an unwelcome claim. Janie, shivering by the hearth, sensed his guarded nature but knew she had no choice. She had to make him understand. Between muttered instructions for her injuries, fragments of the truth spilled out. "He would have killed me," she whispered, her voice still hoarse. "They were taking me to the woods to bury me." Archie only grunted, applying a bandage to her arm. He wanted no details, no part of her world. "Whatever it is, it ain't my fight, ma'am," he stated, his voice a low rumble. "You're safe for the night. Come morning, you'll be on your way." But Janie was unwavering, her hand instinctively pressed against the lining of her skirt. "I have proof," she insisted, her voice gaining a desperate strength. "Letters. Contracts signed. They could destroy Thomas Blunt." The words hung in the air, cold and undeniable, severing Archie's last threads of detachment. By saving her, by cutting her free from the literal and metaphorical bonds, he had not merely offered a temporary reprieve. He had been irrevocably drawn into a conflict far beyond his quiet ranch, a dangerous web of corruption and vengeance. The papers she carried were not just evidence. They were a declaration of war, and Archie Montgomery was now undeniably, inescapably involved. The days that bled into one another following the storm brought a strained, unyielding quiet to the Montgomery ranch. Janie, despite her lingering injuries, refused to be idle. Her presence in Archie's meticulously ordered world was a jarring disruption. She understood, with a clarity sharpened by desperation, that she could not afford to be a burden. Each morning, she rose early, attempting to integrate herself into the ranch's demanding routine. She helped with chores, mucking stalls, feeding the livestock, mending worn equipment. Her movements still stiff, but her resolve unwavering. Archie, though often visibly irritated by her unsolicited help and the disruption to his solitary rhythm, found himself watching her. His initial annoyance gave way to a reluctant fascination, his eyes drawn to Janie's fierce resilience and quiet determination. He barked terse commands, avoided her direct glance, and retreated into himself the moment a task was done. Yet he could not ignore the subtle shifts within his own guarded heart. Janie, in turn, felt an inexplicable pull towards Archie. His gruff exterior hid a deep, quiet strength, an integrity that contrasted sharply with Thomas's polished deceit. She saw the lines of worry etched around his eyes, not for himself, but for the unspoken predicament she represented. There was a raw honesty to him, a stark simplicity that pulled at something deep within her, a longing for something real after years of artifice. The unspoken attraction between them grew with each shared glance, each moment of strained silence, building like dry kindling waiting for a spark. The palpable, charged atmosphere between them reached its volatile peak on a blustery afternoon. The wind, a capricious force, whistled through a loose plank on the barn roof, threatening to tear it free. Archie had climbed a rickety ladder, mallet and nails in hand, to secure it. Janie, having just finished sweeping the barn floor, paused below, her gaze drawn upward by his precarious ascent. She watched as he reached for the flapping board, the strong gusts buffeting his frame. Then, disaster struck. A weathered plank, weakened by years of sun and storm, gave way beneath his foot with a sudden, splintering crack. Archie cried out, a guttural sound of surprise and pain, his body lurching precariously. He grabbed wildly for purchase, his fingers scrambling against the slick, worn wood, but found none. For a terrifying, suspended moment, he was airborne, a silhouette against the stormy sky, heading for the unforgiving ground below. Instinct took over. Janie didn't think. She simply reacted. With a surge of adrenaline, she lunged forward, her hand shooting out, grasping blindly. Her fingers closed around a handful of his heavy, canvas-work shirt, just as he was about to crash onto the hard-packed earth. With all her strength, she yanked. It was enough. The trajectory shifted. Instead of plummeting, Archie was pulled sideways, his momentum carrying both of them. They tumbled backward, a tangled heap of limbs and cloth, landing with a soft, surprising thud into a freshly piled mound of sweet-smelling hay. The impact knocked the breath from Janie's lungs. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light slicing through the barn's high windows. Archie lay half on top of her, his heavy frame momentarily pinning her. Her heart hammered against her ribs. His breath was ragged, hot against her cheek, smelling of sweat and earth. Their eyes, wide with the shock of the near-fatal fall, locked. So close, too close. She could feel the rapid pulse in his neck, the warmth of his skin against hers, his raw power. The world outside, the howling wind, the distant threats, it all receded, fading into an indistinct hum. There was only this moment, this shared breath, this sudden electric awareness. Then the inevitable happened. Like dry kindling catching fire, the spark ignited. His gaze, usually so guarded, held a primal intensity. Her lips parted slightly, a silent invitation. Slowly, as if drawn by an invisible, irresistible force, he lowered his head. The kiss was a silent explosion, fierce and primal, born of terror, relief, and a desperate, burgeoning desire. It was deep, raw, undeniable, a silent promise whispered between two souls who had stumbled into something they both knew was dangerous. The world tilted again, but this time it was from the sheer, overwhelming force of their shared vulnerability. When they finally broke apart, breathless, the silence was heavy with 1,000 unspoken words, a profound understanding dawning between them. There was no going back now. Even as this fragile, forbidden connection ignited, the outside world pressed in with merciless intent. Thomas Blunt, a man accustomed to having his will obeyed, was not one to be thwarted. His wrath was a calculated, insidious force. Not content with mere pursuit, he leveraged his formidable influence, turning the county's legal machinery into his personal weapon. Within days, the town of Blackwood was plastered with wanted posters. They were stark depictions of Janie, declaring her unstable and mentally unbalanced, and urging her immediate return to her rightful husband, Thomas Blunt. The lie, cleverly crafted, painted her as a deranged runaway, not a victim. The townspeople, already wary of Thomas's power, whispered amongst themselves, their fear outweighing any shred of doubt. Sheriff Randall Hayes, whose years in law enforcement had been a slow descent into corruption, wasted no time. His coffers had long been lined by Thomas's illicit dealings, and Janie's exposure threatened to unravel his own carefully constructed facade. Judge Milton Crane, whose gavel swung to the rhythm of Blunt's gold, signed the official warrants with a chilling lack of hesitation. Their personal interests were inextricably linked to Thomas's. The posters, nailed to saloon doors and general storefronts, declared a legal hunt. Janie was now a criminal, a fugitive in the eyes of the law. And for Archie, whose entire life had been predicated on avoiding entanglement, the implication was clear, chilling, and inescapable. To harbor Janie Blunt, the mentally unbalanced wife of the powerful Thomas Blunt, was no longer merely a risk. It was a crime, an act of defiance against county authority. The kiss, an intimate rebellion, had sealed his fate even before he saw the damning notices. He was involved, legally and irrevocably. The damning posters had not merely been nailed to the general store and saloon doors in Blackwood. They had been hammered into Archie Montgomery's very soul. Each passing day, as Janie's crudely drawn face stared out from every public surface, branding her unstable and mentally unbalanced, the weight of Archie's decision grew heavier. The legal hunt, sanctioned by Sheriff Randall Hayes and Judge Milton Crane, men whose loyalty was bought by Thomas Blunt, transformed Archie's act of kindness into an undeniable crime. He felt the threads of his carefully constructed neutrality fraying, unraveling under relentless pressure. Archie spent his days in a grim routine, ranch work a physical anchor against the churning storm within. He rode fences, fixed pumps, repaired hinges, each action precise, almost desperate in its focus. But his mind was a battleground. He saw Janie's quiet strength, the honesty in her gaze, her instinctive act to save him. He remembered the kiss, an explosion of raw emotion that had shattered decades of self-imposed isolation, leaving him breathless and irrevocably changed. Yet, the practical man reasserted himself. The posters were a direct threat to everything he owned. The ranch, his legacy, his identity could be lost. Harboring Janie was not just defiance. It was an act that could cost him everything. Doubt, cold and insidious, began to creep in. Had he traded his peace for a woman he barely knew, for a fight that wasn't his? The solitude he had cultivated now felt like a lonely echo, a sanctuary breached. The external pressure found its voice in Eli Montgomery, Archie's younger brother. Eli arrived unannounced a few days after the posters appeared, riding into the ranch yard with a cloud of dust and a storm brewing in his 31-year-old eyes. Eli had always been a bitter shadow to Archie's stoic presence, envying the quiet respect Archie commanded. This entanglement with Janie offered Eli a twisted sense of gratification, a chance to see his unshakable brother stumble. Archie saw Eli approach from the barn, his shoulders stiffening imperceptibly. He watched his brother dismount, a smirk playing on Eli's lips, a cruel glint in his eyes. Eli's gaze swept the ranch, then fixed on Archie with an almost predatory intensity. Well, if it ain't the righteous man," Eli drawled, his voice a low, mocking rasp. "Heard you've taken to collecting strays, Archie, and a high-priced stray at that." Archie leaned against the weathered barn doorframe, his arms crossed, his face a mask of stone. "She ain't a stray, Eli. She's a woman in trouble." Eli scoffed, striding closer. "Trouble, you say? The whole town's calling her unbalanced. A liar. Thomas Blunt's got the sheriff and the judge on a leash, brother. You think you can outrun that kind of power?" He jabbed a finger towards a faded wanted poster tacked to the barn wall. "This ain't just about her, Archie. This is about us. About our ranch. Our name. Blunt will burn this place to the ground for harboring his mad wife." Eli's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, laced with venomous urgency. "Hand her over, Archie, before she destroys what is ours. You always kept your nose clean. Why throw it all away for some woman who's nothing but a burden? She'll bring us ruin." Eli's words were calculated to exploit Archie's anxieties, to pry open the cracks in his resolve, portraying Janie as an existential threat to their legacy. But Eli's poison failed to take root. His words, intended to unravel Archie, instead tightened the threads of his conviction. The kiss, raw and undeniable, had seared away the doubt. Janie's truths, whispered amidst healing wounds, had peeled back the layers of corruption festering beneath the county's polite veneer. Protecting her wasn't an inconvenience. It was a reckoning. It wasn't about the ranch or the risk, or even the burgeoning desire consuming him. It was about justice, a concept he had rarely embraced, but one that now burned with unwavering light. Looking at Eli, Archie saw a reflection of the man he once was, afraid of entanglement, driven by self-preservation. But he was no longer that man. The quiet dignity of his solitude had been exchanged for a burgeoning sense of purpose. He met Eli's challenging gaze, his own eyes hardening with a resolve that brooked no argument. "She stays," Archie stated, his voice low, firm, leaving no room for negotiation. "And she ain't a burden. She's a witness." Eli stared, stunned by the uncharacteristic defiance. Archie cut him off, a steel edge to his tone. "You want to run, Eli, you run. But this ranch ain't all that's ours. There's a right and a wrong in this world, and I ain't turning my back on it. Not anymore." Eli rode away, leaving Archie with a grin set to his jaw. He knew the path he chose was fraught with peril, a direct confrontation with the most powerful men in the county. But in that moment, the choice felt impossibly clear. Protecting Janie was the first truly just thing he had done in years. Later that evening, as Janie slept, Archie sat by the window, staring out at the star-dusted plains. The decision, born of pressure and conviction, solidified within him. He wouldn't simply hide Janie. He would empower her. He wouldn't run from Thomas Blunt. He would confront him head-on. There was only one place grand enough, public enough, to truly expose their corruption: the town church. He envisioned the scene, the quiet congregation, the Sunday sermon. He would turn the pulpit, a sacred platform for spiritual truth, into a crucible of secular justice. Next Sunday, it was a calculated, audacious, and irreversibly dangerous gamble. But with Janie and the damning documents, he now possessed the weapon. And with the kiss, he had found his cause. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that once that line was crossed, there would be no going back. The quiet rancher was about to become a reluctant warrior, and the sleepy town of Blackwood was about to witness a revelation that would shatter its fragile peace. The Sunday dawned crisp and clear, a stark contrast to the preceding tumultuous days. Archie and Janie rode into Blackwood in silence, a quiet resolve settling between them. Janie, clad in Archie's hastily altered shirt and a sturdy skirt, felt the hidden documents, a pulsating weight against her thigh. Her heart hammered, but her gaze was steady, fixed on the church steeple ahead. Archie, riding beside her, felt the town's curious, judging stares, but remained unyielding. Their gamble was profound, but his conviction held firm. The modest wooden church was packed, every pew groaning under the weight of the assembled congregation. Thomas Blunt sat in the front row, a smug sneer on his lips, flanked by Sheriff Randall Hayes, wary, and Judge Milton Crane, outwardly pious. Eli Montgomery sat further back, a storm of unease churning within him. The solemn preacher's sermon, a blur of scripture, soon ended. As the final hymn faded, a heavy silence descended, thick with anticipation. Thomas shifted, confident of Janie's imminent capture. Hayes's hand hovered near his pistol. Crane steepled his fingers, a silent puppet master. Then, the rear doors creaked open. Janie Blunt stood framed in the doorway, a solitary figure against the morning light. Clad in Archie's simple clothes, she exuded a newfound strength, a quiet dignity that belied her recent suffering. Her face was pale but resolute, her eyes burning with unwavering purpose. A collective gasp rippled through the congregation. As she walked slowly down the aisle, her footsteps echoing, there was no sign of madness, only compelling courage. Archie stepped from the shadows near the pulpit, deliberately placing himself beside her, a silent, unyielding bulwark. Their defiant tableau sent a clear message, intensifying the gasps. Thomas Blunt sprang from his pew, his face contorted in apoplectic rage. "What is the meaning of this?" he thundered. "This woman is deranged, a liar, a fugitive." Janie ignored him, her gaze sweeping across the townsfolk. Her voice, soft at first, resonated with clarity. "My name is Janie Blunt," she began, gaining strength. "And I am not mad. I am a witness." She spoke of her gilded cage, of the cruelties inflicted upon her and the county. She laid bare the sham of her marriage, the silent abuse, the suffocating fear. "My husband, Thomas Blunt, is not merely a powerful man," she continued, her voice rising. "He is a thief, a smuggler, and a liar. He has stolen your land, your taxes, and your trust." A wave of murmurs swept through the congregation. Thomas, face mottled red, lunged forward. "Silence her. She's delusional, a traitorous viper." He stormed towards the altar, intent on silencing her. Sheriff Hayes hesitated, caught between duty and complicity. Judge Crane visibly paled, shrinking into his seat. But before Thomas could reach her, Archie moved. Swift and decisive, his fist, hard as the land he worked, connected with Thomas Blunt's jaw with a sickening crack. Thomas reeled backward, sprawling to the floor amidst the congregation's gasps. Chaos erupted. Screams tore through the air. A collective roar rose. In the pandemonium, as Thomas struggled to rise, a single shot rang out, sharp and deafening. The church froze. Smoke cleared around Thomas Blunt, lying motionless on the aisle floor, a dark stain blossoming on his shirt. Alvejado, dead. The sight of Thomas's lifeless body, ignominiously sprawled before the altar, shattered the town's lingering fear. A spark of defiance, long suppressed, ignited. Sheriff Hayes, visibly shaken, fumbled for his weapon, uncertain. Judge Crane tried to slip away, but it was too late. The dam had broken. Janie, hands still pressed to the documents, seized the moment. "The proof!" she cried, her voice ringing out. "The proof of his crimes, and theirs." With trembling fingers, she pulled the documents from her skirt lining. Forged contracts, fraudulent receipts, incriminating letters, and held them aloft. They were damp, crumpled, but undeniably real. These show how Thomas Blunt stole your land, how he bribed the sheriff, how he corrupted the judge. Her words, coupled with the damning papers, galvanized the crowd. A righteous fury replaced awe and terror. Men surged forward, no longer onlookers. They seized Sheriff Hayes, disarming him roughly, their faces grim with years of suppressed anger. Judge Crane, attempting to flee, was quickly apprehended. Other associates of Blunt found themselves similarly cornered, their reign of corruption brought to an abrupt and violent end by the very people they had oppressed. The church, once a sanctuary of quiet worship, had become a crucible of justice, a public tribunal where years of deceit were finally brought to light. On that day, Janie Blunt ceased to be the unstable wife. She became the woman who had dared to defy the most powerful man in the county, the unwavering voice of truth who had freed her community from tyranny. And Archie Montgomery, before merely the quiet rancher who had hidden from the world, was now the man who had chosen love, even at great cost, a reluctant hero forged in fire and righteous indignation. As dusk painted the western sky in hues of orange and deep violet, Janie and Archie sat on the porch of the Montgomery ranch. The silence between them was different now. Not a barrier, but a comfortable space filled with unspoken understanding. Janie, wearing a simple shirt of Archie's, leaned her head against his shoulder. His calloused hand, usually so guarded, gently covered hers, their fingers intertwining. The vast, silent plains stretched before them, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. It was not a storybook ending, not a rosy, uncomplicated happiness. Their peace was hard-won, forged in tempest and blood, born from chaos and undeniable desire. But it was real, and it was theirs. And so, the quiet defiance of a rancher, stirred by the desperate plea of a woman, ignited a fire that purged the darkest corners of Blackwood. From the rain-soaked plains to the hallowed halls of the church, Janie Blunt's courage, armed with damning truths, shattered the reign of a tyrant. Thomas Blunt, once revered, fell, his empire of corruption crumbling with him, brought down by the very community he exploited. Archie Montgomery, the man who once sought only peace, found it not in solitude, but in the tumultuous embrace of justice and love, forever changed by the storm he dared to weather. Their story, etched in the dust and blood of the unforgiving West, reminds us that even in the bleakest landscapes, the human spirit, when pushed to its limits, can forge a path towards truth. It speaks to the profound, transformative power of a single choice, a single act of courage, to rewrite not just one destiny, but the very fabric of a community. Sometimes, the greatest peace is not found in avoiding conflict, but in confronting the darkness, hand in hand, letting the light of integrity guide the way. What courage would you find, standing at the precipice of such a revelation, facing down a world determined to keep secrets buried? Share your thoughts below. If the echoes of Janie and Archie's journey have stirred your soul, perhaps another tale awaits. Join us next time for another journey into the heart of the untamed West. Until then, if this narrative resonated with you, show your support by leaving a like and subscribing to Whispers of the West. Your engagement fuels these stories, allowing us to keep the spirit of the Old West alive.